This 5-color deck is a Sliver tribal build with the primary focus of achieving victory through combat. We want to cast Sliver creature spells, cascade into additional Sliver creature spells, expand our resources, draw cards, and cast more Slivers. We rinse, we lather, and we repeat this process until we have amassed a formidable army of Slivers, eventually winning the game by overwhelming our bewildered and beleaguered opponents. The First Sliver debuted in Modern Horizons 1 and is a 7/7 Sliver with Cascade for WUBRG mana. Our general gives Sliver spells we cast Cascade. When we cast a spell with Cascade, we exile cards from the top of our library until we exile a non-land card that costs less. We may cast that spell without paying its mana cost. We then put the exile cards on the bottom of our library in a random order. Note that the First Sliver's Cascade enablement only applies while it is on the battlefield. If the First Sliver's own Cascade ability lets us cast another Sliver card, then that Sliver will not have Cascade because the First Sliver has not been put onto the battlefield yet. Once the First Sliver is in play, thanks to the strategic crafting of this build, if we cast a Sliver spell with a mana value of 5, then the potential exists that we could cast 5 total spells without paying their mana costs as we cascade through our library. When this value engine is paired with a tribe that does not need any more synergistic benefits, the result is a battlefield teeming with an overwhelmingly powerful number of combat-enabled Sliver creatures, and another imminent victory to follow. We begin this deck tech with our land base. This deck has a total of 5 basic lands, 1 of each color. We also have all 10 of the shock lands. These lands enter the battlefield tapped unless we pay 2 life, have 2 different land types, and tap to add 1 of 2 different colors of mana to our mana pool. We also have the 5 triomes from Ikoria, Lair of Behemoths. These lands enter the battlefield tapped, have 3 different land types, and tap to add 1 of 3 different colors of mana to our mana pool. As an option, we can cycle these lands away from our hand for 3 generic mana and draw a card. Next are the 10 fetch lands. We can tap these lands, pay 1 life, and sacrifice them to search our library for a land with 1 of 2 different basic land types and put them onto the battlefield. Note that these fetch lands can put our basic lands, shock lands, and triomes into play from our library. The last of our lands help to color fix our mana. Command Tower taps to add 1 mana of any color in this build, while Reflecting Pool should do the same and easily can be considered Command Tower version 2.0 here. With the continuing popularity of 5-color EDH decks, Exotic Orchard has the potential to become another version of Command Tower, albeit temporarily, of course. Path of Ancestry comes into play tapped, but taps to add 1 mana of any color in this deck. If this mana is spent to cast a creature spell that shares a creature type with our commander, then we scry 1 as well. Sliver Hive taps to add 1 mana of any color, but this mana can only be used to cast Sliver spells. This land does have an option to tap it for a colorless mana, in addition to paying 5 mana, tapping it, and creating a 1/1 colorless Sliver creature token, which is an ability that we can activate only if we control a Sliver. Due to the generally low mana values of the Sliver tribe, there are only 6 Slivers with mana costs of 4 or more in this build. Ramping mana is not as vitally important as in other builds. Still, we do have sources of accelerating our mana for the purposes of engaging in our Cascade engine sooner rather than later. Cryptolith Rite is an enchantment that gives creatures we control the ability to tap to add 1 mana of any color to our mana pool. Whenever a creature enters the battlefield, Mana Echoes provides us the option of adding an amount of colorless mana equal to the number of creatures we control that share a creature type with it. Note that Mana Echoes ability triggers for us whenever a creature controlled by any player enters the battlefield. If our opponents have slivers that enter the battlefield, we add colorless mana equal to the number of sliver creatures we control to our mana pool. That'll teach our opponents to keep their slivers off of the battlefield. Herald's Horn does not necessarily ramp our mana, but it provides a cost reduction of 1 generic mana for sliver creature spells we control, as long as we choose slivers as our preferred creature type when this artifact enters the battlefield. Also, at the beginning of our upkeep, we look at the top card of our library. If it's a creature card of our chosen type, then we may reveal it and put it into our hand. Herald's Horn provides tempo and card draw abilities, which are important features for revving our Sliver Cascade engine. We have a handful of mana rocks that synergize with our Cascade engine. If any sliver spells we control with mana values of 1 are cast and have Cascade, then Soul Talisman and Mox Tantalite can become free to cast. These artifacts have Suspend, but when cascaded into, we are allowed to cast them, and it costs us 0 mana to do so. This helps to ensure that we maximize our Cascade benefits by providing a no-cost option. Soul Talisman taps to add 2 colorless mana, while Mox Tantalite taps to add 1 mana of any color. As 0-cost spells go, Mana Crypt is the gold standard. It taps to add 2 colorless mana. It also has an upkeep coin-flipping trigger that will deal 3 damage to us if we lose the flip. Soul Ring and Arcane Signet close out our mana rocks. Soul Ring taps to add 2 colorless mana, while Arcane Signet taps to add 1 mana of any color in this build. Getting cards into our hand is vitally important for the purposes of cascading through our deck. Mystic Remora helps to keep the cards flowing, as long as we pay its cumulative upkeep. At the beginning of our upkeep, we put an age counter on this enchantment, and then we sacrifice it unless we pay its upkeep cost for each age counter on it, which is 1 generic mana for each age counter. Whenever an opponent casts a non-creature spell, we may draw a card unless that player pays 4 mana. An early game Mystic Remora could put a lot of slivers into our hand. Guardian Project can put a lot of cards into our hand as well. This perfectly made for EDH enchantment has us draw a card whenever a non-token creature enters the battlefield under our control, as long as it does not have the name as another creature we control or a creature card in our graveyard. Guardian Project is a card that acts as fuel for our Cascade engine. When Kindred Discovery comes into play, we choose slivers, of course. Whenever a sliver we control enters the battlefield or attacks, we draw a card. Note that this enchantment does not limit its card drawing trigger to just non-token creatures. Due to the versatility of our slivers, we do not need to inundate the 99 of this build with various removal and disruption spells, which also helps to prime our Cascade engine as well. However, there most likely will be times when opponent interaction is necessary. Lucky for us that this deck is 5 colors, because it provides us Magic's entire catalog of removal spells. For targeted creature removal, Swords to Plowshares and Path to Exile are the gold standards. Both of these spells are instants that exile creatures for just 1 white mana. The controllers of these creatures respectively either gain life equal to the exiled creature's power, or searches their library for a basic land and puts it onto the battlefield tapped. Expanding our targets are Assassin's Trophy and Anguished Unmaking. Assassin's Trophy destroys target permanent an opponent controls. That permanent's controller may search their library for a basic land card and put it onto the battlefield. Anguished Unmaking exiles target non-land permanent. We lose 3 life in the process. Since we are planning on inundating the battlefield with slivers each and every game, we do not want to incorporate a stacked suite of mass removal spells. We should have the biggest, the most evasive, and the most threatening army at the table, and if there is a permanent or 2 that are threatening us, we can utilize any of the aforementioned spot removal spells to take care of them. With that in mind, we would be remiss if we failed to include any mass removal or disruption spells in this build. Enter Cyclonic Rift and Blasphemous Act. With Cyclonic Rift, if we pay its overload cost, then we return each non-land permanent we don't control to their owner's hands. Although Blasphemous Act has a mana value of 8 and 1 red mana, we will most likely pay just 1 red mana to cast this spell, as its mana cost is reduced by 1 for each creature on the battlefield. Spending 1 red mana to deal 13 damage to each creature is inordinately valuable, even more so when we consider that this sorcery could be a win condition in this build. We have a slew of other spells that synergize with and strengthen this Sliver build. Let's protect our board with Heroic Intervention and Teferi's Protection. Heroic Intervention gives permanents we control hexproof and indestructible until end of turn, while Teferi's Protection phases out all of our permanents. While they are phased out, they are treated as though they do not exist. They phase in before we untap during our untap step. Also, until end of turn, our life total cannot change, and we have protection from everything. These spells prevent our opponents from interacting with our side of the battlefield, which should attract a lot of attention throughout the game. Since we are running 5 colors here, we have access to every tutor in Magic, so let's be sure to include the best tutors in the game. Demonic Tutor puts any card from our library into our hand. Profane Tutor does the same, and is included in this build as another no-cost Cascade Into option. Vampiric Tutor puts any card from our library on top of our shuffled library, and we lose 2 life in the process. Genesis Wave can flood our side of the battlefield with a ready-to-win army of slivers in just 1 turn. For X and 3 green mana, we reveal the top X cards of our library. We may put any number of permanent cards with mana value X or less from among them onto the battlefield. We then put all cards revealed this way that weren't put into play into our graveyard. At this moment, 86 of the 99 cards in this build are permanents, and none of them have mana values greater than 5. We can consider Genesis Wave a win condition in this build. The same could be said for Patriarch's Bidding. Each player chooses a creature type, and then each player returns all creature cards of a type chosen this way from their graveyard to the battlefield. Although we should be in the best position after resolving this spell, caution must be taken. We must heighten our mindfulness to what's lurking in our opponent's graveyards for the purposes of ensuring that we benefit the most from casting this sorcery. Whenever a creature we control attacks, Shared Animosity gives it +1/+0 until end of turn for each other attacking creature that shares a creature type with it. This enchantment's presence on our side of the battlefield can be game-ending if we send enough slivers into combat. Training Grounds reduces the cost of activated abilities of creatures we control by 2 generic mana. This effect cannot reduce the mana and that cost to less than 1 mana. Although there are only a few slivers in this build that benefit from Training Grounds' cost reduction ability, these discounted activated costs are well worth dedicating a slot in the 99 for this enchantment. There are over 100 different non-changeling slivers in Magic, and at this time, this deck has nearly 1/3 of them. There is a blend of Hive Mind slivers, which are slivers that grant abilities to all sliver creatures in play regardless of their controllers, and slivers that only grant abilities to sliver creatures we control. The slivers in this build have been categorized based upon the benefits that they provide. We begin with slivers that provide mana abilities. Gemhide gives all slivers tap, add 1 mana of any color, while Manaweth provides this ability only to creatures we control. Redundancy here is our friend, but note that with both of these slivers under our control, we cannot tap a sliver to produce 2 mana. Basil provides mana acceleration as it gives all slivers, sacrifice this permanent, add 2 black mana. Next up are slivers that provide card advantage. Dormant gives all slivers Defender, and when this permanent enters the battlefield, draw a card. Whenever a sliver deals combat damage to a player, Synapse provides the option for that sliver's controller to draw a card. Through its Rummage ability, Hollowhead gives slivers we control tap, discard a card, draw a card. Hibernation gives all slivers pay 2 life, return this permanent to its owner's hand. while homing has sliver cycling, which means that we may pay 3 generic mana, discard this card, and search our library for a sliver card, reveal it, and put it into our hand. It also gives each sliver card in each player's hand sliver cycling. Sliver Overlord allows us to pay 3 generic mana to search our library for a sliver card, reveal it, and put it into our hand. We also can pay 3 generic mana to gain control of target sliver. Slivers are such a powerful tribe because of the number of various mechanics that they enable for each other, as we are about to demonstrate. But first, let's buff our slivers' power and toughness, shall we? Muscle and Sinew give all slivers +1/+1, while Predatory gives slivers we control +1/+1. Sedge gives all slivers, this creature gets +1/+1 as long as we control a swamp, and pay a black mana, regenerate this permanent. It is very likely that we will control a swamp, and paying a black mana to regenerate a sliver is a feature that our opponents may not see coming. As the ultimate sliver showstopper, and ender of sliver contests for years and years, Sliver Legion gives all slivers +1/+1 for each other sliver on the battlefield. This is a sliver version of Coat of Arms, which is not included in this deck due to its potential to help our opponent's tribes as well. Like that matters when we're rolling with slivers, baby. Since it is a sliver through its changeling ability, Mirror Entity is a must-include for the purposes of establishing another avenue of combat enhancement. We can pay X, and until end of turn, creatures we control have base power and toughness of XX and gain all creature types. With the amount of mana we can produce in this build, Mirror Entity could provide a bigger power and toughness boost than the aforementioned Sliver Legion. There is no shortage of ability enhancement present throughout this tribe, so let's start rolling them out. Heart gives all slivers haste, Gale Rider gives slivers we control flying, and Cloud Shredder gives slivers we control both flying and haste. Redundancy is important here, as both haste and flying are vitally important abilities for the purposes of winning games seemingly out of nowhere in this build. Sentinel gives the slivers we control vigilance. Shifting makes it that all slivers cannot be blocked except by slivers, which is pretty much a form of unblockable unless our opponents have slivers or creatures with changeling. Siphon gives slivers we control lifelink, while Clot gives all slivers, pay 2 generic mana, regenerate this permanent. Venom gives slivers we control Death Touch. Virulent gives all slivers Poisonous 1, which means that whenever a sliver deals combat damage to a player, that player also gets a poison counter. A player with 10 or more poison counters loses the game. Sliver Hivelord gives slivers we control Indestructible, while Quick has Flash and allows any player to cast sliver spells as though they had Flash. Striking gives first slivers we control First Strike. Crystalline gives all slivers a Shroud, which means that they cannot be targeted by spells or abilities. Note that this includes our spells and abilities as well. Two-Headed gives all slivers Menace. Diffusion gives slivers we control, when this creature becomes the target of a spell or an ability an opponent controls, counter that ability unless its controller pays 2 generic mana. In this era of Magic, this ability is called Ward 2. Aside from their varying powers, the slivers in this deck can have haste, flying, vigilance, lifelink, regenerate, death touch, poisonous 1, indestructible, flash, first strike, shroud, menace, ward 2, and can only be blocked by slivers. This is just a sampling of how slivers synergize with each other, and we're not done yet. We have some slivers that offer us utility benefits as well. For some additional spot removal, Necrotic gives all slivers, pay 3 generic mana, sacrifice this permanent, destroy target permanent. For direct damage options, Spiteful gives slivers we control. Whenever this creature is dealt damage, it deals that much damage to target player or planeswalker. Lava Belly gives slivers we control. When this creature enters the battlefield, it deals 1 damage to target player or planeswalker, and we gain 1 life. Note the potentially game-ending synergy among Spiteful, a host of other slivers, and a well-timed casting of the aforementioned Blasphemous Act. Realm Walker is another creature with Changeling, which, of course, means that it is also a sliver. When Realm Walker enters the battlefield, we choose slivers as our creature type. We may look at the top card of our library at any time, and we may cast creature spells of the chosen type from the top of our library. Providing the top of our library is an extension of our hand, heightens our threat level of consistently getting slivers onto our side of the battlefield. Speaking of getting slivers onto our side of the battlefield, we have the Sliver Queen. We can pay 2 generic mana to create a 1/1 colorless sliver creature token. As Magic's first ever 5-color legendary creature, Sliver Queen is the catalyst to some soon-to-be showcased game-winning combos. We have some very valuable engines present in this Sliver deck, and one of them centers on the Sliver Queen. At its core, we only need Sliver Queen and Mana Echoes. When a Sliver enters the battlefield, we add an amount of colorless mana equal to the number of slivers we control. When this sliver comes into play, it triggers Mana Echoes, and we add 2 colorless mana. 1 for the sliver that just entered the battlefield, and 1 for the Sliver Queen. We use this 2 mana to activate Sliver Queen's token-producing ability and create a 1/1 colorless sliver. When this sliver comes into play, it triggers Mana Echoes, and we add 3 colorless mana. 1 for the sliver token that just entered the battlefield, 1 for the sliver that came into play before it, and 1 for the Sliver Queen. We rinse, we lather, we repeat, we create an infinite amount of colorless mana and an infinite amount of 1/1 colorless slivers. With any haste enablement in the forms of Heart Sliver or Cloud Shredder Sliver, we should win the game through combat. If Lava Belly Sliver is on our side of the battlefield, we should win the game through direct damage. If not, and our opponents refuse to yield, if we have Necrotic Sliver under our control, then we can destroy all of their permanents with the infinite sliver tokens and colorless mana we created through our Sliver Queen Mana Echoes combo. This is not the only game-ending combo present in this build. The next involves 2 cards that have not been showcased in this deck tech yet until now. The first is Allurin. Allurin allows any player to cast creature spells with mana values of 3 or less without paying their mana costs, and as though they had flash. There are over 24 sliver creature cards that have mana values of 3 or less in this build. This was done intently for the purposes of maximizing Allurin's effectiveness. Any slivers with mana values north of 3 had to be slam dunk inclusions in order to be slotted into this deck, which meant some usually worthy slivers missed the cut. Note that these creature spells are cast and not just put into play. Also note that Allurin provides this ability to our opponents as well, but we will benefit from it so much more. Our second yet-to-be showcased card for this combo is Cloudstone Curio. Whenever another non-artifact permanent enters the battlefield under our control, we may return another permanent we control that shares a permanent type with it to its owner's hand. With Allurin and Cloudstone Curio now revealed, this is our plan. If we cast a sliver creature card with flash and for free through Allurin, then when it enters the battlefield, it triggers Cloudstone Curio. We choose another sliver with a mana value of 3 or less and return it to our hand. Here, we establish an infinite loop of casting slivers for free and returning them to our hand, and through this loop, we can do a great many things. With Dormant Sliver, Guardian Project, or Kindred Discovery, we can draw as many cards as our heart desires, or draw cards until we find the one card we need to close out the game. This one card could be Lava Belly Sliver, which gives slivers we control. When this creature enters the battlefield under our control, it deals 1 damage to target player or planeswalker, and we gain 1 life. Through this dynamic, we win the game through the peripheral direct damage dealt by our slivers coming into play through our Allurin Cloudstone Curio combo. Remember, each time we cast a sliver creature spell, if the first sliver is on our side of the battlefield, then we cascade. Well, each time we cast a Sliver creature spell through Allurin, although the mana values are limited to 3 or less, those slivers will cascade into a plethora of other slivers or some non-sliver spells. If there is a specific sliver or card we need to put the game on ice, then we can cascade our way to that card through this engine. Even if our Allurin and Cloudstone Curio loop becomes untied, we have another way of ripping through our library. We need either Gemhide Sliver, Mana Weft Sliver, or Cryptolith Rite on our side of the battlefield, which allow our Sliver creatures to tap to add 1 mana of any color to our mana pool. Then we need our last to be revealed card of this Sliver deck tech, Intruder Alarm. Creatures do not untap during their controller's untap steps, and whenever a creature enters the battlefield, untap all creatures. Note that this ability applies to our opponent's creatures as well, but we will benefit from it so much more. This is our plan. We tap our slivers for mana through either Gemhide Sliver, Mana Weft Sliver, or Cryptolith Rite. We cast a Sliver creature spell, it enters the battlefield and triggers Intruder Alarm, which untaps all creatures and allows us to tap them for mana again. A steady stream of cards helps to provide fuel for this engine, so any combination of Dormant Sliver, Guardian Project, or Kindred Discovery revs it further. If stuck, then Hollowhead Sliver's Rummage ability can help us replace cards in our hand with Sliver creature cards. Our goal here is to produce oodles of mana, draw cards, and cast spells until we find our way to victory. Let's not underestimate the effectiveness and efficiency of Training Grounds in this build. Although its synergies are sparse, the few creatures that benefit from this enchantment's cost reduction and activated abilities are powerful enough to warrant its inclusion in this deck. Training Grounds reduces the activation cost of each of these cards down to just 1 generic mana. We regenerate slivers with Clot. Upon a sliver's sacrifice, we destroy a target permanent with Necrotic. We tutor for or gain control of slivers with Sliver Overlord. We create 1/1 colorless sliver creature tokens with Sliver Queen. As demonstrated throughout this video, our abundant mana production can yield amazing results when some of these cards and Training Grounds are on our side of the battlefield. Lastly, there are some slivers whose absence may be noticeable from this deck, and we're going to take a quick moment to explain the reasoning for this. Harmonic Sliver gives all slivers, when this permanent enters the battlefield, destroy target artifact or enchantment. This is not a May ability, and as highlighted earlier in this video, we have a suite of very powerful and valuable artifacts and enchantments in this deck. We do not want to destroy them by our own hand. Historically, Harmonic Sliver can have a paralyzing effect in this type of deck, and its presence is not warranted or welcomed here. Clot is preferred over Crypt here due to the presence of Crystalline in the 99. If our slivers have Shroud, then we cannot utilize Crypt Sliver's regenerative ability because we cannot target them. With Clot, as long as we have mana, we can regenerate our slivers without the need to target them. Crystalline is a powerful spot removal deterrent, but it hurts when we are unable to utilize an ability like Crypt Slivers. That is why Crypt is out and Clot is in. Bone Scythe, Megantic, and Magma fell victim to missing the cut due to their mana values being higher than 3. Remember, slivers with mana values of 3 or less were prioritized in this build due to Allurin. Bone Scythe's mass double strike enablement does not seem as necessary when inventorying the various other abilities provided by the other slivers in the 99. Megantic's mana value of 6 would make it the highest costed card in the build, which does not seem worth it for only a triple Anthem effect. Magma followed suit with Crypt since its ability becomes useless when Crystalline is in play. Winged used to be in the 99 of this deck. At that time, even though Gale Rider was a better option due to its cheaper mana value and personalized flying enablement, having both provided evasion redundancy, and this was too good to pass up. However, when Cloud Shredder hit the scene, and as more and more slivers continued to inundate Magic's card catalog, Winged became obsolete, and yielded to the much more powerful Cloud Shredder. Of all of the slivers that are not in the deck at this moment, Brood, Thorncaster, and Dregscape are the most tempting to consider. Brood's token-producing enablement to all slivers is most tempting, and in the future, if more slivers are created that take advantage of slivers entering the battlefield, like Dormant and Lava Belly, then perhaps Brood forces its way into this deck. Thorncaster's direct damage enablement should be viewed with higher praise here, but it falls short in this build when compared to our spot removal spells and abilities. Perhaps if a future sliver or two provide additional benefits secondary to this direct damage effect, maybe through Infect, then we can reconsider Thorncaster's potential presence in this build. As for Dregscape, the Unearth mechanic is not a favored ability around which to build or even consider as an outlet for recurring slivers. Our sliver's imminent exile upon being unearthed from the graveyard is not enticing, particularly with various spells and abilities that can be utilized to recur them to the battlefield longer than just one turn. Mostly, this is personal preference mixed with a heightened awareness to the prevalence of graveyard hate in the format, which motivated this deck's increased focus for various layers of protection as demonstrated throughout this deck tech video. This is a feature that our opponents do not appreciate. For us, we'll appreciate any future games they want to play with us against this sliver deck. This first sliver build has been added to the Burgeoning Commander Catalog, and this video also becomes the starting point of a First Sliver EDH deck video primer series. These playlist series can be accessed in the description below, on our YouTube page, or at the end of this video. The Burgeoning Commander Catalog is my personal collection of EDH decks. An EDH deck video primer series showcases the continued evolution of a deck through future appearances on the Up and Up series, during which we update and upgrade decks featured on this channel. The full card list for this build can be found in the description, and be sure to share your thoughts about this first sliver deck in the comments section below. This is MTG Burgeoning, your channel for all things Magic.